of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. I now recognize the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Jordan from Ohio, for much time as he shall consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On October 22nd, 2020, just 2 weeks before the most important election we have, election for President of the United States, then candidate Biden said regarding his son's dealings with foreign companies, quote, "Nothing was unethical. My son has not made money from Chinese business interest." Now, there are 4.8 million reasons why that statement was not accurate. And how do we know? How do we know that statement was not accurate? The Washington Post told us so last week. Not Mike Johnson, not President Trump, not Republicans. The Washington Post told us this last week. They did 2 stories last Wednesday, one at 11 a.m., one at 11:04 a.m. 2 8-page stories, 4 minutes apart, confirming what we already knew. The laptop was real, the eyewitness was real, the emails were real. The only thing fake 18 months ago in the run-up to the presidential election was the news. I find that amazing. 2 8-page stories, 4 minutes apart, saying the laptop is accurate, all the emails are accurate, saying this from the Washington Post, when for 18 months they said, no, it was Russian disinformation. I mean, think about what happened in the run-up to the most important election we have. Big media, big tech, and Democrats all colluded to bury that story. Something I think the American people would have liked to have known a little something about as they went to the polls to elect the commander-in-chief. And they were joined it wasn't just big tech, big media, and Democrats telling us something that wasn't true. They were joined by 51 former intelligence officials who told us it was Russian disinformation. Now think about this. This is funny how the story has changed. First, it wasn't his laptop. Then it was, it was his laptop, but it was Russian disinformation. Then it was, no, it wasn't Russian disinformation, but Joe Biden wasn't involved. And now it was, Joe was involved, but he did nothing wrong. Amazing how that's all changed in 18 months. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and figuring out what we can do with the Foreign Agent Registration Act of 1938. Probably does need some changes, something done to it. But the title of today's hearing is Enhancing FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act of 1938. How about we just figure out a way to apply it consistently? As the ranking member said in his opening statements, this has been used just about anyone who was involved in the Trump campaign had it used against them to get information and do a prosecution, do the whole Mueller investigation, which found out there was no collusion. We obviously had collusion here. Maybe it does need to be applied, at least in a consistent fashion, to Hunter Biden. We know Hunter Biden took millions of dollars from the wife of the mayor of Moscow. We know he took millions of dollars from energy companies in Ukraine and millions of dollars from companies in China with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, including, as the ranking member mentioned, CEFC, which paid him $4.8 million in 1 year's time. Should Hunter Biden have registered under this act? Why didn't he register under this act? Why is the Department of Justice being inconsistent? At least that's what it seems. When, as the ranking member said, only 7 people were prosecuted between 1966 and 2016, and then, shazam, they started using it against everyone associated with President Trump's campaign, it seemed. So this is important. The chairman of the committee just said, we're not here today to discuss individuals. But I do think the American people would like to know the truth about this story and why it was kept from them, kept from we the people, prior to, as I said before, the most important election we have in this nation. That's important information, and I hope we can begin to dig into that. This committee should dig into that. We should be all about making sure the American people get the truth and not have, as I said before, big tech, big media, Democrats, and 51 former intel officials tell us something in the run-up to the election that was not accurate. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Our witnesses are here. We welcome you and thank you for participating. Introduce each of the witnesses before their testimony. Therefore, you might remember who they are. You get 5 minutes. There's a light system in front of you. Green means you're on, and you have somewhere between 1 and 4 minutes. Then it turns yellow, that means you're down to your last minute, and when it turns red, that means you should be finished. Your full testimony will be entered into the record, although 5 minutes is what you're limited to in testimonial. I'll give verbal notice on the minutes remaining today as well. Before proceeding with the testimony, I'd like to remind all of our witnesses that you're under oath to tell the truth, and if you don't, you could be cited with a violation of Section 1001 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. Our first witness is Mr. Jacob Strauss. Doctor, it says there. I guess he is a doctor. He's a specialist on the Congress and the Government and Finance Division of the Congressional Research Service, which is one of our most esteemed branches. He works on lobbying, ethics, commemorations, including monuments and memorials, and congressional advisory commissions. Dr. Strauss received his MA and PhD in political science from the University of Florida and his BA from the University of Maryland. Dr. Strauss, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Cohen, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the Congressional Research Service, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My testimony focuses on two areas: the history of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, and legislative proposals to amend the law. Concern over foreign influence in American politics dates to the Revolutionary War and the Continental Congress's alliance with France. President George Washington addressed foreign influence in his 1796 farewell address, writing that, quote, "History and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government." In the early days of the Republic, several incidents brought concerns about foreign influence to prominence. In 1808, for example, the House of Representatives authorized an investigation into allegations that General of the Army James Wilkinson was a Spanish agent. General Wilkinson was ultimately acquitted, but governmental interest in the potential influence of foreign governments and actors on American public policy remained for much of the next century. The idea of regulating foreign influence dates to at least the early 1900s, when the first pieces of legislation aimed at directly addressing the real or perceived possibility of foreign influence in American politics were introduced. These measures generally would have required the registration of individuals or groups seeking to influence public policy or promote propaganda. With the rise of Nazism in 1930s Germany, concern about foreign propaganda and influence grew. In 1934, the House created the Special Committee on Un-American Activities to investigate foreign propaganda and influence. Chaired by future Speaker of the House John McCormack, the Special Committee investigated the scope of foreign influence activities in the United States and the spread of subversive propaganda that originated from foreign countries. In 1937, Representative McCormack introduced the bill that would become FARA, and on June 8, 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed it into law. As enacted, FARA sought, as described by the Department of Justice, to, quote, combat the spread of hidden foreign influence in American politics. Specifically, FARA responded to foreign influence concerns by creating a system designed to identify agents of foreign principals who might engage in subversive acts or in spreading foreign propaganda, and to require them to make public record of the nature of their employment. Over the years, Congress has substantially amended FARA on several occasions, most notably in 1942, 1966, and in 1995. Today, the Department of Justice administers FARA. The law, as amended, generally focuses on individuals conducting advocacy or public relations work on behalf of foreign principals within the United States. These agents of a foreign principal are required to register with DOJ and provide information about their business and foreign principals they represent. For each foreign principal, a foreign agent must periodically disclose to DOJ copies of contracts, details of the financial relationship, advocacy and public relations activities, and informational materials. In recent years, various members of Congress have introduced a number of measures to amend FARA. A CRS review of these bills identified several trends. Broadly, these bills propose to provide civil investigative demand authority to DOJ, change the penalties that can be imposed for noncompliance, repeal or modify exemptions to FARA, modify the administration of FARA by DOJ, amend FARA registration and disclosure requirements and public access to documents, alter the requirements for labeling of informational materials, restrict certain former federal officials, including members of Congress, from acting as foreign agents, and require reporting to Congress and the DOJ on FARA implementation, administration, and enforcement. In closing, the Foreign Agents Registration Act is more than 80 years old and primarily focuses on foreign agents engaged in advocacy activities in the United States. The congressional proposals recently introduced to amend FARA include a range of options. CRS is available to discuss these provisions further. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Our next witness will be Mr. Dylan Heitler-Gaudet. He is the Government Affairs Manager at the Project on Government Oversight. In this role, he advocates for more accountable and transparent federal government through advancement of good government policy reforms. He focuses on issues ranging from lobbying and ethics reform to judicial accountability and congressional oversight. He received his MS degree from Northeastern University and his BA from the University of Southern Maine. Mr. Heitler-Gaudet, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Cohen, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee. My name is Dylan Heitler-Gaudet, and I am the Government Affairs Manager at the Project on Government Oversight, and I'm privileged to be here with you today. I want to first start by commending the committee for holding a hearing on the Foreign Agent Registration Act and ways to improve it. Making much needed and long overdue reforms to this law will not only help the federal government keep a closer eye on the activities of foreign lobbyists and those who advocate on behalf of foreign interests, but it will also demonstrate to the American people that nobody is above the law, which includes politically well-connected K Street operatives. Shining a bright light onto the sources and activities of foreign lobbying is essential to protecting the integrity of U.S. political and policy-making processes. The Foreign Agent Registration Act is designed to do just this by requiring robust disclosure and reporting requirements on the part of those who advocate on behalf of foreign interests. We as a nation have been concerned with the potentially corrupting impact of undue foreign influence in domestic affairs since the dawn of the Republic, and today is no different, with the exception of the fact that today's foreign actors have ever more access to more sophisticated and more effective ways of influencing and shaping U.S. policy toward their own ends, which includes having access to a willing cottage industry of mercenary lobbying firms and influence peddlers. There are a number of flaws in the Foreign Agent Registration Act framework, and I want to highlight just a couple of them with you today, and I'd like to offer some proposals. I would encourage the committee to refer to my written testimony as well as to a supplemental report I have attached to that testimony to see a more complete range of proposals. First and foremost, the Department of Justice has not and continues to not sufficiently prioritize the enforcement and administration of this law. Back in 2014, the Project on Government Oversight published a comprehensive report in which we laid out a wide number of issues with the Foreign Agent Registration Act. One of our key findings was a systemic pattern of lax enforcement and an overall lack of interest at the highest levels of leadership at the Department of Justice. In 2016, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice had its own report in which they found very similar things. Unfortunately, not much has changed in the intervening years. One way to remedy this problem is to create a dedicated, standalone office that is responsible for enforcing and administering the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Right now, those responsibilities are in the hands of an under-resourced subcomponent within the National Security Division, and this simply isn't working. One other issue we see with the Foreign Agent Registration Act is registration itself. There are a large number of people operating here in DC who should be registered under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, but they aren't. One of the key reasons for this is the existence of a large loophole, the LDA exemption. The LDA exemption allows lobbyists who should otherwise be registered under FORA to avoid doing so by simply registering under the far less restrictive Lobbying Disclosure Act. One key way Congress can strengthen the law is by closing this loophole. One other issue we see with the Foreign Agent Registration Act is its over-reliance on criminal prosecution as the primary enforcement mechanism. We are encouraging Congress to create civil monetary penalties as another option in the toolbox that will enhance enforcement of this law at the Department of Justice. Lastly, I want to raise the issue of the outdated and anachronistic way that the Department of Justice makes available to the public the documents and materials that are filed by registrants. We are 22 years into the 21st century, and it's long overdue for the Department of Justice to overhaul and modernize the way it makes these materials available to the public, which must include adherence to and compliance with the latest guidelines and standards related to digital